Philly, Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, you'll find a fusion of jazz and hip-hop. The rhythms in from the bright lights of NYC to the falls of Niagara. Every corner, every town, we're all connected, brother.
Welcome, 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 everybody. We are so glad that you're here. And we are welcome you to the star that stirred the drink. I'm very grateful that you are here. We're going to have a real New York conversation. I want to give you some heads up about the space. Right now, everybody in the space, except our speakers, are on mute and will remain on mute for the duration of the program. That said, we encourage and welcome your comments, thoughts, questions in the chat as we're going along, and especially towards the end. If we see questions in the space, we will bring them up for our panelists to consider. And but you are on mute, so please be aware of that. It's not an accident. We did it on purpose so that we don't have random stray sounds, and so that we can pay all of our attention to our amazing panelists of speakers. With that, Lou, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Tamara Bond Williams, who, by the way, a shout out, was recently, if you read the press release, promoted to Deputy Executive Director of SSPI. So congratulations to you rising up in the ranks.
Thank you, thank you.
We consider ourselves here somewhat of an elite group at SSPI, primarily because of Tamara and the rest of the team. Today, we're going to be talking about perhaps another elite company. They've been called many things, the Ford Motor Company with thrusters and much else. I like to call them the Yankees of the space industry, and that's just sort of a cheap plug to promote what's coming next. This is from 2002, the last time they were in the series, and I saved it because I knew it would happen again. So congratulations to the Yankees. 2 games up, and there's an 84% chance now that they will win out. So all you New York fans out there who love the Yankees, give you a shout out, and those who don't, of course, love the Mets and will shout me down. So we will be talking about Starlink today, obviously in the news. We've got a special guest who just put out a quick take on something related to Starlink. So with that, we've got actually 3 all-star journalists with us, as well as a representative of Deutsche Bank to talk this issue through. And of course, we'll have Joe Fargnoli with his New York Minute at the end. And let's get it going. Before we do that, though, let's thank the people who brought us here. And those would be our sponsors. And there they are. And we appreciate them. I'm going to point out Clyde and Company because next month we will actually be at their location for a live New York Space Business Roundtable, and Tamara or I will tell you more about that later. But we really appreciate the support of these companies throughout the year. We couldn't really do this without them. And our supporting organizations who also promote the fact that we're here and that we do this, and that they can and also contribute to many of the things that we do, especially Space News and World Teleport Association and SBQ, Space Business Qualified. And talk about the news. Let's go to our Better Satellite World video.
I'm Pat Ryan, and I approve this message.
Or not.
In retirement, we trade in one kind of company for a better kind. But Allison Esposito...
That was not the video.
You know, I was voting for Esposito until I saw this. And...
Let's try that again.
There we go.
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff. Vehicles pitching downrange. Booster after chamber pressure nominal.
Now pass through the maximum aerodynamic pressure, the most stress the vehicle's going to see on the way uphill. Coming up on hot staging next.
Ship engine
There's
startup.
most engines cut off.
Stage separation. Booster
Stage
upright.
separation,
Startup.
hot stage separation confirmed.
On the left hand,
Startup.
landing burn,
13 engines.
ignited. We're now down to 3 Raptor engines. We can see those chopsticks now in the air.
Booster landing burn shutdown.
Micavilla has popped the booster.
It never gets old. Does it, Tamara? I mean,
Not even a little bit.
I mean, you know, those of us in the industry, we always got a thrill at launch. I mean, it's the home run of the industry, but now the reverse of it coming down gives us as great a thrill. I mean, that's remarkable innovation. So congratulations to our members at SpaceX and for that Starship rocket booster capture. Just remarkable. Jason Rainbow of Space News, you've seen a lot of things in the industry. Does it still feel fresh when you see something like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially when you go in person, you can not only see it, but just feel the impact, the gravity of what's going on. You know, your clothes ripple and the sound as it goes through you. It's incredible. Never gets old. You're right. Yeah,
it's really incredible. And you know, we talk about SpaceX as the obvious game changer, right? Is there something beyond a 800-pound gorilla? I'm sure there is, whatever the tonnage is on the launcher. But getting to your core journalistic skills and our significant digits report, and you're reporting on Starlink for Space News, which is what we're going to talk about today. What would you say have been the most important economic dynamics that business so far has brought to the commercial space industry? What kind of data do you look at when you say this is the impact that is, you know, worth it for me to report on and worth it for us to have this business here?
Yeah, and it's an important question because it might be easy to forget how, you know, not long ago, satellite internet was seen as a niche technology of last resort, and it still is. But you know, now in the consumer market, we have Starlink dishes going on top of cyber trucks, and just in general, satellite internet has become something of a household name, better, you know, lack of a better way of describing it. And it's not just in residential, right? Just a few years ago, satellite internet companies focusing on, you know, business and government customers would tell me they weren't worried about Starlink encroaching on their business because Starlink was focused on residential commercial customers. And unlike them, Starlink prefers to go alone and sell directly to customers, whereas a lot of the folks serving bespoke markets like oil and gas would say you need to go through partners that are close to these customers on the ground because of all the quirks and tailored managed services that are needed for this kind of customer. And residential broadband is still a big part of Starlink, but of course we've seen them now branch out into pretty much every other segment because they have so much capacity up there. A Starlink executive recently talked about having 300 terabits per second of capacity up there, which, you know, continues to increase amid SpaceX's relentless constellation launch campaign. You know, they're not done yet by any means. And they also changed their tune when it comes to partnerships. They've been striking up distribution deals with service providers such as Speedcast, for instance. And what's really fascinating is we're starting to see them now become increasingly dominant in in-flight connectivity.
Yeah.
You know, they're winning some major airline deals, and that's a big deal because retrofitting planes is not something airlines do lightly. It's a long-term bet, and they have to ground planes to equip them with satellite internet. And it's particularly interesting for me because these airlines are choosing a LEO-only solution from Starlink when I think multi-orbit terminals are pretty much ready to go. And I've talked before about how the old guard geostationary satellite operators believe the flexibility and redundancy of multi-orbit is key to taking on Starlink's growing dominance. It's not a clean sweep by any means. Multi-orbit players are still getting deals in aviation and elsewhere, but Starlink is at what, more than, it's more than 4 million subscribers now. And when Starship does come online, that will push the network into an even higher gear. But yeah, that said, as I mentioned at the start, Starlink also helped, I think, thrust satellite broadband into the mainstream, not just for consumers, but for businesses and governments. Where that goes, who knows? But at the end of the day, we're talking about the potential for universal, meaningful connectivity, that holy grail that terrestrial networks can just not reach on their own. And that's not just great for those currently unconnected around the world, but people in areas that get disconnected by a natural disaster or something like that, like we've seen recently in Florida and North Carolina.
Yeah, and economic output from that, the ancillary economic output from that connectivity will be significant, as we've seen from broadband through fiber, right? Connecting cities and places that were suffering in the post-industrial age and now are reconnected again, and people going back home, back into places.
Exactly, yeah. The overarching kind of theme is global digitization. It's directly linked to GDP, so as more places get more and better connected, that just has widespread effects.
In the in-flight connectivity game, I mean, to quote the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago, do you think Starlink will be able to make connectivity in planes, and again, I'm quoting the report in the journal, not suck?
Yeah, well, that's no, exactly. I actually haven't had an opportunity to be on a plane yet with Starlink Wi-Fi, but they tout it as it basically being pretty much the same as you would get broadband you would get at home. Which is wild to think about, because every plane I've been on, it's been a little bit of a frustrating experience, but apparently we're right on the horizon. That's going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah. I have to ask you though, you spend a lot of time hovering around boardrooms. Is there also a sense of, should we say, maybe fear that Starlink brings to certain companies? Because I mean, it is a dominant company like few others that we've ever seen in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, a lot of the satellite companies, I thought they would be kind of somewhat removed from the impact of Starlink, are now seeing them come into their businesses in the enterprise market, things like maritime and things like that. So all of a sudden, they have this, pretty aggressive competitor in the market. But on the flip side, Starlink won't always be the only one. We're seeing Kuiper getting ready to launch, I think next year is when they're starting to ramp up their constellation, and then Telesat's constellation coming up. So there will be competition out there, but Starlink has a pretty good head start on them.
Yeah, we invited Kuiper to come on, by the way, and they said, no, we prefer to concentrate on serving our customers. So we don't necessarily want to be here this time, but we'll join you in a future segment. Jason, just a final question for you. Looking ahead at 2025, which significant digits will you be looking at or referring to as you choose your subjects for reporting on Starlink?
Top of the list, maybe direct to device or direct to smartphone. That's when I think initial text messaging service will come out in a meaningful way. They've been testing the network during the recent hurricanes to enable text messaging when cell services have been downed, and also for emergency SOS alerts. So seeing that in, I mean, and it depends on whether they will get regulatory approval. There are a lot of interference concerns at the moment. That could kind of affect terrestrial networks. But seeing that used in a commercial way would be interesting. They would be one of the first to actually make money from this if that does happen. So I think that's top of the list.
Yeah. And listen, you're coming to us from Florida, and you told us offline earlier that you're okay. Everything was okay with you.
Yeah, I got relatively lucky from where I am in Florida, but my heart goes out to everyone affected by these recent hurricanes. There's a lot of work to be done to help communities to recover.
Yeah, and Starlink and many others in our industry were there to help. So
absolutely, and
shout
also
out to
geostationary satellite operators too. Yeah,
you bet. Jason, thanks again for making the time, and I know you're going to stick around. So good luck with everything going forward. Good
thank
to
you.
see you.
Pleasure as always. Thanks.
Well, as I mentioned, we have a terrific panel today, and we have a late arrival who has joined us. So let me introduce them for you. First up is Michael Sheetz. There are some people who really don't need an introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway because I just like referring to Michael's credentials here. He's a CNBC's award-winning space reporter. He joined the world leader in business news nearly 10 years ago and has been covering the industry since then. He contributes across both CNBC and NBC Universal's global content offerings, from digital reporting to TV reporting, and is the author of that weekly newsletter, CNBC's Investing in Space, which is definitely something we're subscribing to. I do. Michael, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to see you again. Next up is Vaibhav Lohiya. He is the managing director at Deutsche Bank Securities and is the global head of space investment banking. He's based right here in New York. Under his direction, Deutsche Bank's leading space sector franchise has provided investment banking services related to M&A and public and private equity, debt transactions, and other services to its global client base. He has 25 years of experience in finance and investment banking and has advised on more than $100 billion plus in M&A transactions and raised more than that in debt and equity capital market transactions from his clients. He holds several degrees. The most notable, in my view, is an MBA from Duke University. Vaibhav, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. And I guess Deutsche Bank can't pay its heat bills as well as you're doing over there. You've got your coat on today.
It's just something you wear in the morning and you keep it on.
Understood. Again, thanks for making the time to be here. We also have a surprise arrival. Yesterday, if you were lucky enough to be a subscriber to the Quilty Quick Take, there was a report on the dissection of Starlink's V3 constellation application. And that one is worth reading, but the author of that is a friend of ours. And so we scrambled to rearrange his schedule for us. And he's also generously making the time. He's Caleb Henry. Many of you know Caleb from the journalistic side of the street, but also now with Quilty. He's the director of research for Quilty Space, which is a boutique financial research firm focused on our industry. Before joining Quilty, Caleb was a journalist, as I noted, reporting on business and policy developments affecting satellite operators, launch service providers, and many others in the space industry for at least two of its most high-profile applications. So, Caleb, we really look forward to your participation today in drilling in a little bit to that report yesterday.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. Vaibhav, I'm going to start with you. The proliferated LEO satellite model is a relatively new emergence, right, in our industry. To what degree would you say it's not only a workable model, but one that could produce the type of scale that investors are seeking? Or let's stop there. Let me ask that question.
I think the scale question is something that we potentially answered early on as we started talking about Starlink. If you were to try and break down the valuations between SpaceX and Starlink, most people would ascribe vast majority of the value that SpaceX has today coming from Starlink. Having said that, we've reviewed the low Earth orbit model for satellite companies in terms of providing connectivity services, whether it be for consumer broadband services or for specialized markets such as maritime, in-flight connectivity, things of that nature. It's a model that it's very hard to make work. And in part because you're launching these satellites every 4 to 5 years. That's a refresh cycle. In order to provide the type of connectivity your customers are looking for, you need to launch X number of satellites for the densification that's required. I think Starlink is close to 7,000 satellites or something like that. Right now, the plan is to go up to north of 40,000 satellites. If you have to refresh every 5 years, think about the number of satellites that have to launch each year, the costs associated with that. And what do you get in return? I think the expectation in the Western world for consumer broadband is somewhere between that $50 to $100 range for a monthly subscription price. As you start to go into other markets outside of the Western economies, especially as you're talking about the unconnected in Africa, unconnected in Asia, etc. Yes, the need is higher, and the fact that they don't have broadband, that kind of makes this as the only option available to them. But the price point that they can bear in those markets, aside from government subsidies, is far lower. And so as we looked at, and we'd done this for companies like OneWeb in its early days when they were talking about this model, 2016, 2017 timeframe, even if you saw a 1-year delay in launch of the constellation, you found that the model was broken and didn't work. And the reason why we think it has, found its way to work with Starlink and what they've been able to prove is in part because they, to a certain extent, stayed outside the public investor eye, continued to fund the business to a point where it reaches a certain amount of scale. They have the benefit of having a vertically integrated business model with launch being somewhat in-house. And so when you think of Starlink as a customer of SpaceX for launch services, and you see them placing an order of 50, 100, 500 launches, then suddenly you start to get bulk, discounts that they're benefiting from or they're taking advantage of. And as you see the scale of getting to that 4 million subscriber mark, but also growing beyond that and going into new marketplaces, it starts to become a model that feels is a lot more sustainable. How that evolves over time and what it displaces or replaces remains to be seen. Earlier in the panel, there was a comment about direct-to-device connectivity. I think Jason mentioned the point about as to what he's looking out for next year. I would probably say that market, sitting here where we are today, feels like one that could really change the game, right? So everything that we had reviewed until now was really looking at consumer broadband, more in a fixed broadband capacity type of model, or you've looked at mobility connectivity, but very small slivers of market and in-flight connectivity or in maritime. That changes, and it changes the access that you're getting to if you were to do a direct-to-device type model. And if Starlink is able to support that as they're planning to or intending to, then you certainly open this up to anyone who carries around a cell phone or smartphone. And that model, could be a lot more profitable than what historically low Earth orbit financial or economic model has been.
Yeah, just because of the number of consumers and users.
Exactly.
Degrees of difficulty. Before I jump to Michael, there's estimates out there, by Astroscale and others that depending on which fleet is there, you're going to lose between 4 and 8% of the satellites every year. There's also obviously the cost to go direct to device. I mean, if you factor those two things in, are they significant in terms of looking at the return of an investment in Starlink and its ultimate scalability?
I'm off the view that they're not. I think that has already been accounted for or factored in the business model and the way we had reviewed this from an economic standpoint. I thought you were going to ask me about space debris. I would have given you a different answer to that question, but I think in terms of the financial sort of math around whether or not 4 to 8% is a significant portion of satellite losses, I think that's all factored in my view.
Yeah, and we'll turn around and get back to space debris a little bit later. But thanks for starting us off. Hey, Michael, got so many questions I have for you. Vaibhav talked about what it potentially displaces. Deutsche Bank has noted at some of its events, and you've also reported that SpaceX and Starlink are among the first and certainly preeminent models of the future of the commercial enterprise at scale. But you asked the question in a recent CNBC newsletter whether Starlink was growing the market for internet service or taking it. What's been your conclusion or observation to date on that?
So it's a fantastic question. And as recent as it seems like I asked that question, when you posited that, I took a quick look and I actually wrote that in May of 2023. And I want to just do a gut check that at that point, Starlink was at about 1.5 million subscribers. That is a little, about 16 months or so on from that. As Caleb, and if you aren't subscribed to Quick Take, I highly recommend it. Caleb does a fantastic job of disseminating really key pieces of intel about this type of stuff. That's fantastic. So, kudos to them and the work they're doing over at Quilty. But they've passed 4 million subscribers as of last month. That, when I was talking to analysts back in May of 2023, that was a staggering growth to get to 1.5 million. Now they're at 4, just over a year later, right? So that context and those numbers give a little bit of clarity around how quickly this ball is moving and how fast that momentum is picking up. My answer on this question also changed pretty dramatically this last Sunday. I'm curious, I want to just do a quick survey, so throw your answer in the chat if you would really quickly. But who, like me, didn't think that they were going to catch the booster on the first attempt? I'll admit, I didn't think they were going to catch the booster. Just flat out, first try, survey, yes, no. If you believed in it, I understand. I thought they would eventually catch it. SpaceX seems to just eventually do everything ridiculous that they set out to do in the first place. But the first try, and then when you look back at the footage and you realize it wasn't landing on those big flaps that, seem like a small enough target as it is. It was landing on these 2 little pegs that are sticking out of the side of the booster, and that's what it's sitting on. So the reason I bring that up, because we watched the video at the beginning of this, and I think it's just, really, really key to the Starlink discussion, because SpaceX's growth with Starlink has been absolutely phenomenal so far. The problem that they're facing, even with all the capacity they've put up, is that they need more capacity to do the proper expansion that they're trying to hit. When you look at the growth numbers that they've, put out, the estimates that analysts have around what that growth looks like, they need those V2 satellites to be flying. And those V2 satellites only fly on Starship. They can't fit them on Falcon 9. They're kind of flying this halfway in between right now. So Starship being able to land its booster back at the launch pad and potentially unlock, even if it's a 2-day, 3-day turnaround, let alone the stuff that SpaceX is talking about launching within an hour of each launch. Even scrub that, get it to like Falcon 9 cadence of just 2 to 3 days of how many V2 satellites they can put up with that capacity and how large those satellites are and what that adds to low Earth orbit. It's absolutely stunning the amount that we change the paradigm of satellite telecommunications from where it is before Sunday. As of Sunday, that paradigm just shifted dramatically because they showed that model was possible. And I think that's a huge piece of this conversation about growing market share, but also taking it. They're taking everything from everybody on every vertical that they can get their hands on: maritime, enterprise, government, military. You go down the list, they're taking it all, but they're also growing it at the same time by just tremendous leaps and bounds. It's sort of this question then of who's left and who can still compete.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a great observation. So, I mean, the conclusion, Michael, that you're saying is it is growing the market. It is feeding this growth. Is there any? Do you have any sense of what that feeding frenzy will look like as the market grows? Who are going to be some of the winners out there?
I think we've
post
already
post 10/13, because you say that's an historic date.
Yeah. Seriously, I mean, I think we're already seeing the beneficiaries of, say, the Falcon 9 rideshare program, right? Like the amount of different types of technologies that are getting tested at relatively low cost that would have never flown 10, 15 years ago is pretty incredible. I mean, just in general, it's the full stretch of academia all the way up into research and development. So that's one really positive kind of ripple effect. The second one that I see all the time is the talent side of it, which is that SpaceX is churning out unbelievable talent, and they work unbelievably hard, because I talk to people who've been there for 5 years and are completely burnt out from 100-hour weeks, but doing their life's passion. And now they're like, hey, I actually have this other thing that I want to go build myself. You look at the ecosystem of anything from seed to Series B, C companies right now. If it's not the founders that were at SpaceX, it's like the entire C-suite and most of the VPs, right? So that talent is also benefiting the market. So there's these ripple effects where maybe SpaceX is dominating in satellite communications, but like it's helping the rest of the market grow and flourish and pick up steam in ways that it couldn't with previous mindsets. I also want to really key in on one thing about the difference of Starlink and where this market is headed, because the feeding, fretting, and see that you're talking about, definitely SpaceX has an enormous lead on deploying their LEO constellation. And there's a really important thing that Vaibhav talked about, which is that they were private and they didn't have to tap public investment dollars, and they weren't, kind of at the whimsy of quarterly reporting and all the things that come with being a publicly traded company. The other big name out there who's getting involved here is Amazon. And you mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
Kuiper is, in fact, beholden to Amazon shareholders. We've even seen, shareholder lawsuits about this. But as Caleb, in Quilty's recent research has pointed out, even if it's costing them 16 to 20 billion instead of the original 10 billion they're talking to deploy it, the payback cycle we're already seeing with Starlink. So Starlink's proving out the business model, and Amazon, even if it only served Amazon customers and AWS customers, that's bigger than all of what Starlink has right now. So you don't even have to go outside of Amazon to be serving a really huge marketplace. So I think that's the second dynamic that comes into question. It's just now a matter of, do the satellites work as effectively as they're saying, and can they deploy them as fast as they need to? Because those are two big unanswered questions for Kuiper right now.
Yeah. You've also sort of outlined the scenario for a duopoly. I'm reading between the lines, but that's a whole other discussion, which will probably get on the table of somebody maybe at the FCC, Caleb. Speaking of which, you reported that yesterday, on October 11th, that SpaceX had filed with the FCC requesting to modify its architecture and establish what it calls SpaceX V3. And that filing pertains to the company's plans for 30,000 satellites. So specifically, I think 29,988 or something. You were very specific on that one. Yeah, that's right. And I think the FCC's authorized about 7,500. That filing did, in your reporting, showcase something that I think we've been talking about today. But what was your take on that? What did you take away from looking at that filing and then thinking about it and reporting?
Yeah, so to me, the biggest takeaway was, I think, a greater sense of clarity around what Starlink is thinking as they envision the future of the system. This is obviously not the first Starlink filing with the FCC or with regulators, and it's common for companies to file multiple times. You can look at other companies, for example, Telesat Lightspeed has filed for over 1,000 satellites, even though current plans are for about 200. OneWeb has filed for thousands, even though the current fleet is around 600. And so Starlink 2 has laid out different architectures to the FCC over time. But this particular filing, for one, it's the first one where, to my knowledge, they've referenced it as the V3, which does seem to indicate that this is going to lead to the next iteration. They've been on the V2 Mini for about 3,000 satellites now. This next one that Michael was talking about, where they're going to need Starship, is this much heavier, much more powerful, and possibly more redundant, which would mean that this would be a longer lasting vehicle as opposed to something that maybe lasts 3 to 5 years, probably looking at a longer lifespan. But I do think that this is much more likely to be something akin to the actual design that Starlink wants to do, with satellites in lower orbits, higher power, and then some of the changes that will correlate to with their gateways and user terminals.
Caleb, your analysis examined four key changes, I think, key modifications. Of the four, I mean, which one seemed most significant to you? There was one that reduced latency, which is always a good thing, but was that the one that you thought was the most significant, or are they all equally so?
So I know that Musk has frequently talked about a desire to have, shoot, I forget his exact goal. It's like sub 28 milliseconds or sub 20 milliseconds. Mike probably knows, but they've always wanted lower latency. I think the real significant change here goes back to the conversation we were having about capacity density. One of the things that has always been a challenge for satellite broadband providers, earlier in the geo world and now also in low Earth orbit, is that when you run out of available or sellable capacity in a region, you have to rationalize your subscriber base. And so what that has looked like in the past, I'm talking about Hughes and Viasat, and now also SpaceX, is charging more in those regions. So Viasat, Hughes had introduced more expensive plans, and that offset some of the customer atrophy that they saw, the subscriber trend that they had. Starlink has had to introduce congestion fees in areas where they just have more subs than capacity allows in order to kind of compensate for that. And the things, there were a lot of, we highlighted again these four changes. There were even more that are in the filing. So what SpaceX is ultimately trying to do is posture Starlink in such a way that it is more adaptive and responsive to those customer needs. And then even long term, they've talked about this future 6G vision where you have this ubiquitous connectivity where you can seamlessly transition from satellite broadband to direct to device to terrestrial, cellular, whatever. You just there's no seams in between any of that. And so I think that's what they're trying to set themselves up for.
Yeah, and that's a breathtaking vision. I want to get back to Michael's point about the way the company has populated innovation and experience out into the marketplace. That talent is a big focus area for SSPI. And we got some questions here, but before I get to those, I want to go back to Vaibhav. You want to just maybe pick up on that. Maybe Deutsche Bank's not necessarily the best person to ask or company to ask on this because it's a soft skill perhaps, but innovation and experience being again spawned by this company that is doing some amazing things and leaping forward at such a rapid pace. I mean, do you factor that in when you look at sort of long range forecasting and investing?
Absolutely. I think there's so many soft aspects of what investors view when they think about investability for companies. The quality of the management team, the quality of talent, those are absolutely one of the top few things that people look at, in addition to, obviously the commercial traction they're getting, the track record, things of that nature. The financials as they are historically is a good guide point or guidepost. But when you think about the future and the long range plan of the companies, you have to take into consideration these other factors. So I fully agree with Michael that the talent that companies like SpaceX and hopefully Kuiper and others are spawning is beneficial for the industry as a whole. One of the things I wanted to mention, this is sort of the way I kind of think about it, right? And maybe this is more as a consumer that I think about it, but it does, in my view, apply to SpaceX, Starlink just as much. When you think about, Elon Musk's another company, Tesla, when you think about as a consumer of somebody who drives a car, right? You notice that the massive change Tesla brought out to the auto industry as a whole. You don't even get these cars, 10 years ago where you had blind spot monitoring and things like that. And certainly Tesla comes around the block and everyone is sort of rushing to really change the technology that the cars are bringing, especially when it comes to software and other aspects of safety, frankly. I kind of look at SpaceX somewhat and Starlink somewhat in the same way. It's a slightly different type of market that they're going after. But what they've certainly done is that they have made everyone who is operating in that industry somewhat uneasy with the status quo. And that's important. I think that's helpful for the industry as a whole. That's helpful for consumers because they're getting a better product. They're getting at a better price point. I don't think that the market is necessarily a one-player market, and that kind of goes back to the talent point. We've always seen, even historically, SpaceX from the last decade and all, really started a number of new companies that came into the marketplace from ex-SpaceX employees. I fully expect to see that from Starlink or Kuiper and companies like that. And I think they have the funding to be able to support these aspirational objectives that they have, but it does kickstart almost an industry. It's going to help existing companies that are providing connectivity. Some that fail to innovate will probably become irrelevant, no doubt about it, but it will be more than two players that are duopoly in the market.
Yeah, and I think that sounds about right. Michael, I've got a question here that I'm going to just throw to you, and then I've got a couple of other questions for you guys. Is there an estimate on how many? This is Christy Damien asking this question. I think he's up in Canada today. I know Christy. Is there an estimate on how many users they need to have in order to become cash flow positive and continue to support this huge R&D? Michael, you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I think it's a little tricky to estimate based off of the fact that it's hard to cipher out, say, the 4 million subscribers, right? It's not all consumer. Then you have to split that up into estimates based off of the 2,500 aircraft they have for IFC deals, what those roughly go for, how much revenue those are generating, the maritime ships, how many they're providing service to, how many terminals on average do each of those ships have, et cetera. You have to walk through the entire model there. I would say, just kind of as a blanket statement, I wouldn't be surprised if they're close, if not at cash flow positivity on a quarterly basis right now. I would say that at least by the end of next year, I think that's a very, safe bet to say they're, regularly cash flow positive on Starlink. The disclosure that Gwen and a couple others made maybe around a year or so ago was that they had at least one quarter of cash flow positive. So they were getting in that ballpark, but it wasn't consistent yet. And as we know, these revenues can sometimes be a bit chunky. So I think they're really close right now if they're not already at it, and it's a very safe bet to say that in the maybe 5 to 6 million range, which they'll probably be at, near the end of this year, that's right in that cash flow positive range.
Okay. Christy, hopefully that answers your question. If not, put another one in there. We've got about 7 minutes left in this segment, and then we'll pick it up again at 1 o'clock. Caleb, let's start talking about sort of the old canard. I got a couple of emails before we did the roundtable, and there's this persistent question that we get. And Vaibhav and Michael join in on this as well. That is the space finance, investment and business growth have a longer term component to them, right? Because it's space, unlike anything we've seen to date. First of all, is that true, Caleb?
I mean, compared to the rest of the world is big, so it's hard to make a one-to-one comparison there. But I think in terms of the general time cycles that VCs look for, yeah, space takes a long time. This is why the SPAC boom that happened a couple years ago was such a celebrated thing. Putting aside whether or not all of those companies should have gone public, it was a relief for investors because they had a means to finally get an ROI on funds that they had put in 8, 9, 10, 12 years ago that hadn't been released. So yeah, this industry can take a long time. It's one where there's demands for heritage if you've not proven your system's on orbit, or if it's on the ground, if you haven't proved it on the ground. Um, Customers are reluctant to buy it. Investors are reluctant to put money into it. Federal contracting measures are distrusting of unproven hardware or software, and all of these things mean that it takes a long time. And again, we're talking about Starlink here. The pace that Starlink has moved at, or SpaceX has moved at to deploy Starlink, I mean, that's a program that got its start 10 years ago, late 2014, early 2015. And today we're heralding it as this great success. But it took a very long time to get there. And throughout the entirety of the 2010s, there was very serious doubt whether or not it would be successful at all, or just a repeat of teledesic.
Yeah. So overnight success and over 10 years, right? And how it
Over
works.
decade success.
Over decade, yeah. Vaibhav, sort of staying with this theme, some of your research, you had a paper, I think, 2 years ago, the big rocket shortage. You seem to be able to frame the industry in a way that rationalizes these long-term future investments, including the startups and growth. Are you sort of in the school that Caleb's in? That, yeah, it does take a long time, but we can rationalize it. 10 years isn't really that long a time. How do you look at that?
Yeah,
And
no,
how do you look at the industry? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I fully agree. I mean, I think it is a long-term horizon for most people coming into the industry. And what makes it harder is that from a capital investment standpoint, it's generally higher than what most VCs are comfortable investing, right? So the CapEx is so much higher than a regular VC type investment going into a software company, for that matter. So that kind of, and that's part of the reason why SPACs, et cetera, were able to fund the businesses as they did, whether people think that was good or bad, whatever that was. Having said that, I think the way we kind of look at the industry is, I look at every industry out there, whether it is, the EVs and, solar cell manufacturing, everything else, essentially new industries that are spawning and have high growth potential. Everything is a replacement of an existing industry. Space is not. And to us, that really makes it as exciting as it does, because you're almost expanding into a new horizon, a new frontier that hasn't existed before. And the potential of this, if it's done the right way, is just immense. And my assumption is that the smartest people in the world, whether it be Elon Musk, whether it be Jeff Bezos and others, are thinking about the industry in the same way. And that's why they're comfortable with those long-term investments. It just has to come from different sources of capital than a regular VC because of the high capex required.
Yeah. Michael, just briefly, because we're going to move on to the next segment. Then at 1 o'clock, we've got the big question for you. Do you generally agree with that?
Yeah,
Or
I
disagree?
absolutely
Yeah.
agree with that. I mean, I think the patience required for this industry is unlike any other, and just the amount of risk that you have to swallow. I mean, we watched what happened to Virgin Orbit and Astra, right? Like, we saw, like, regardless of what you think of the business models, and I think there were fundamental, questions and concerns, the bottom line that really sunk a lot of the ways was spending way too much for what they were doing at the current standpoint, and two, with what they did spend their money on, not executing and delivering. I mean, look at how many failures Astra and Virgin Orbit had as launch providers in the few launches that they did. That tells the story right there, right? Like, you can debate the future of whether or not small launch would have had a sizable market or not, but it kind of was irrelevant to what really sank them at the end of the day, which was that underperformance and spending the money poorly. So, but they still torched like $500 million and more each in capital, right? So that bottom line in that patience and that stomaching of risk, you don't need to find that in a launch company. You can find that in almost any part of the space industry, to varying degrees. But you have to have patient capital. And I think that's, if anything is going to really pick the momentum back up and bring a lot of investors back to the table, it's going to be that patient capital that's leading. And I've seen some in the last 6 to 12 months, especially in the venture capital world, where people are looking at deep tech space realm as investable again, after 2 years of really just mostly doling out funds to existing portfolio companies. So there's a sense of renewed investment happening, but it's gonna take a while to get that investor to come back to the table, in the same way that the space sector needs to be building that trust with investors of, okay, we saw what the mistakes of the past were with this, spending the capex in the wrong places. We're not going to make the same mistakes again. We're going to be, savvy and efficient, and, run as lean as possible to demonstrate, simple minimum viable product, reaching orbit, demonstration of operations in orbit, those kinds of critical, things that Caleb was talking about getting heritage, right? Like that's so important. And the industry, to build the trust of even the most patient investors, has to do that very methodically. I mean, it's so important to do it in a really clear way, as much as it might be hard to, educate around what the opportunity is and how big that opportunity is within the space sector or domain, which is what I fundamentally agree with. That is a really slow step-by-step process. And like we said before, I mean, it's an overnight success that was 10 years in the making. That's really what has to happen.
Yeah, the process becomes important here. But I'll tell you that cheering that you hear for SpaceX and Starlink, that also sends a signal about confidence, doesn't it? I mean, that level of embrace. But then I'm an emotional guy because the Yankees won last night. But I think you're absolutely right, Michael. We're going to come back at 1 o'clock with, we've got a bunch of questions out there. So we'll get those answered for you from the panel. And we'll ask the big question: what could slow Starlink down? Stick around for that. But in the meantime, Joseph Fargnoli of the New York Space Alliance, as he does every month, has been listening patiently. Today he's out in San Diego. Not Rochester, but we'll forgive him for that. Joe, what did you hear today?
Well, first of all, Lou, thanks for assembling such a great panel. Really, a lot of great insights and expertise here. And one of the things we try to do in the Space Business Roundtable is not just talk about headlines and highlights. We try to talk organically about what we see going on in the space industry. We try to ask really hard questions, give our viewers and listeners some perspective and proportion on what might be in the space industry, because we want to see it thrive. We want to see it develop. One idea comes to mind that there are very few bad ideas, but there's lots of bad timing out there. And everything that we've heard here is about how do we properly time a space enterprise, right? How do we not move out of the blocks too early? And how do we set a cadence for the deployment of capital that's sensible? One program that didn't come up in this conversation at all was a predecessor to Starlink, a program called Teledesic that we worked in the late 90s between Bill Gates and Boeing, which was identical to Starlink. It was a program that was early, a lot of money was spent on it. Great idea, wrong timing. When I think about what in the world, and we talked about human resources, we talked about the personnel side of this business, and there were some great examples given of SpaceX alum moving on and doing other great things because they had this mindset. And I thought to myself, what gave Elon the guts to move off and do Starlink? And then I thought about two terms. One term is learned helplessness, and the other term is self-efficacy. Learned helplessness is where we're convinced that things are hard and we really can't do that. Self-efficacy is where we build the ability within ourselves to renew our strength, go out and try to conquer things again. It's a self-empowerment. And I think about the fact that Elon came from South Africa. What about him was not programmed into learned helplessness? What about him was able to look at a complicated problem like a Starlink and look at past failures and say, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it differently. And I offer that a mindset that we need to maintain in the space community is one of self-efficacy, not of learned helplessness. And I think about what in the world gave Elon the guts to assign a woman to be the CEO or the president of Starlink, who I think is one of the best space executives, male or female, in the industry, and Gwen Shotwell. What led him to break down those barriers and to think about a new way to go about space? And I bring that up because although I am immensely jealous of Starlink, just put that out there, I am also really thrilled with their success because it shows that we can knock down these paradigms. Because something didn't work 20 years ago doesn't mean it can't work today. If we can break out of these mindsets of helplessness and develop a mindset of self-efficacy and a mindset of accompaniment where the space community comes together in fora like this, and we share wisdom and experience. We look at what failed and why, and we talk about those things, and we look at how to go about it better. I think we're going to promote and produce an even more robust space ecosystem.
Very good, Joe. Just quickly, I mean, but is the legal proposition, the model, absolutely workable, or
the legal proposition? I'm sorry.
Leo. Lower authority.
I'll leave it to the market to determine that, but I will also tell you the Yankees have a 16% chance of not going to the World Series.
Where'd you hear that? 16, you said.
16.
16. Yeah. Well, okay. I'll bet my button with you.
Don't get your hopes up.
All right. All right. Don't be negative, Joe. Come on. Listen, thank you so much for that. And of course, you'll stick around at 1 o'clock as well. Tamara, I know we've got a bunch of questions out there, but we want to get to some announcements, some important things coming up for SSPI before we go back to the panel. So can we get that rolling, please?
Absolutely. Yes.
Over to you.
Over to me. Okay. Well,
we'll go back and forth.
Okay.
I'm excited about the conversation. Yeah.
You know, and so is our audience. We have so many questions. Listen, before I start rambling, the panelists, you might have seen this in the chat, but I'm letting the panelists know there are lots of questions. No chance we're going to get to all of them. So if you've got a feedback for the audience, please drop them in the chats. Quickly, WTA, AI in the teleport. Is it the next bubble or the next great innovation? This is a report that our sister organization, World Teleport Association, has put out, and you can get it by visiting them. I will find the link and drop it in the chats after I go through all of these different slides. So,
well, that's an industry in transition too, and this will be a terrific report.
Yeah. Well, we had a fantastic conversation about AI in space. So this is just more of it and a more detailed look at the ground segment. So do take a look at it. Hey.
Oh, look at that.
Very excited to congratulate Joan Mancuso, who I've worked with for years in the satellite industry. She is our Mentor of the Year. She will be honored at the Future Leaders Celebration next week, Monday. But next week, Thursday, we will be having our Mentor of the Year conversation with Joan at the SSPI WISE All Members meeting at 2 p.m. If you pull up the QR code right there, you'll be able to get the link, but actually you can just go to the website. It's there. wise.sspi.org, and it is going to be by Zoom, just like this meeting. So super easy for you to come. Please come.
Tamara, the world would be a better place if everybody was like Joan. Seriously.
Honestly, she's the sweetest person on the whole planet. She really is.
What she's given to the industry. We talk about talent and experience and mentorship.
And she's still doing it. Just so that you know, she's still mentoring women, especially because she's part of the SSPI WISE mentorship program. And all of her mentees wrote in to support her because she's a wonderful human being and they adore her. So check her out on next week, Thursday.
And WISE remains our fastest growing special interest group. So please, if you're not involved, let's talk to
Get
Tamara.
involved. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Space Business Qualified. If you've had a moment to look at the screen, I'm absolutely not going to read it because we don't have time. But Space BQ, these are some of our young people. These are some people, not just young people. Trina's a young person who was one of our 20 under 35 a couple of years back. And Pierre-Marc Noël, co-founder and managing director of tech firm Canaris. These folks have taken advantage of Space Business Qualified, which is SSPI's online learning program developed in collaboration with the wonderful company SatProf and GVF, now GSOA. When you really want a big perspective, the kind of broad perspective that we come to count on from folks like Caleb and Michael Sheetz, you can get your start at having a really broad view of the industry by participating with our Space Business Qualified program. All right. Okay, you know I talk so fast I make myself hyperventilate, but seriously, next week, Monday, you need to come.
Need a little oxygen?
Yes, always. But I'm going to keep going until I pass out. So anyways.
Well, Joe and I will pick it up for you. You're
Okay.
doing great.
Seriously, next week,
The promotion.
satfuture.com, Monday, October 21st at Silicon Valley Space Week. It's the first night of the event. That's unusual for us. We're usually on the Tuesday. We'd love to see you there. This is a lovely, lovely, lovely event where you get to meet some of the brilliant minds who are representing the future of our industry. I say future in quotes because honestly, some of them are already phenomenal leaders today. So you can get to know them by coming to the Future Leaders Dinner next week, Monday.
And we've named our 20
Okay.
under 35, and you can read all about them on the SSPI.org site.
That's absolutely true. Okay. Hey, so Lou said my last title was corny, so I fixed it. So we got a little space hustle and flow.
I like
Get
that.
real, y'all.
I like that one.
We're going to be live in New York. We're going to be live in New York, thanks to Clyde and Company.
Michael Sheetz is smiling at that title.
You got to get your hustle and flow on, seriously. So we're going to do it. We're going to talk about what is the business of the space business, right? We're going to have a little conversation. You know, I'm hoping Michael's going to be there. So I got my fingers and toes crossed. And you're all welcome. This will be a hybrid event, so there will be, you know, the online version. And if you are here today, which you are actually already registered, so you don't have to do anything extra. But if you click again on that QR code, and I will also put the link in the chat, you will be able, I don't know why it's not showing, but you will be able, oh, okay, there it is. If you click on if you take a picture of the QR code, or if you follow this link, cut-ly/NYSBR-November-live, you'll be able to register for the live event. You'll also see it, of course, you'll see my emails announcing it. What else do I got here? Okay, at the very end of this year,
We're going to London, right?
on the 2nd of December, which is the first Monday in December, we always have the Better Satellite World Awards dinner. It is a phenomenal event. It is one of those events that makes you just grin from ear to ear to be a part of this industry because of the amazing things that our industry does for the world. You want to be there. If you can come to London on the 2nd of December, come. You are well invited. I will again put links. I've got a bunch of links to put in chat, but expect them, they're coming. But yeah, so this is one of our events. This year, we're going to do something new, the UK Satellite Personality of the Year. There are 3 nominees that we will be announcing them at the dinner. And in the next week or 2, you'll be finding out who are the honorees for the Better Satellite World Awards, and you'll be able to read their stories. And at the dinner, you'll be able to meet all of these amazing people. So
yeah, and I'm lucky enough to MC that event. That's a very high profile event. That's Lord David Willits, chair of the board of the UK Space Agency. And it's all the players in the industry are there. So that one sells out fast, but boy, it is just a very festive night on top of everything else. So I really love that event. It's great to be in London around the holidays.
yeah, the British do Christmas very, very
They
well.
really do. Yeah, they do.
Okay, and then of course, in March, I put that Gwen Shotwell was inducted into the Hall of Fame on the 2018. March 11, 2025, we will have our next round of inductees inducted into the Hall of Fame. You'll be hearing soon about all of that, but just save the date. And with that, we're done.
We're done. Yeah, let's go back to the panel and the questions. I also want to just give Caleb's program a shout out. It's the Space Take is a free 2 times a month, I believe, Caleb, update and roundup of space sector financial activities, right? And so anyone can subscribe to that. You don't have to be a friend of yours, personal friend.
That's correct. Although
All right, okay.
personal friends are encouraged, but
Personal friends are good.
Friends of Caleb.
It's all of our short form analysis, our quick take, as we call it, as well as a summary of our latest longer form reports, which include summaries and deep dives on mega constellations, things in satellite communications, and things in the remote sensing world. So those are kind of our key swim lanes.
Exactly. And we encourage people to sign up for it, and of course to read Space News as well, because Jason and Deborah Werner, our other reporter, are always doing great reports. We're going to talk now about what could slow Starlink down. I mean, you know, the Titanic sank. The Russians got beat in 1980 by us in hockey. Things can slow down in life, but there's a question there first that I want to get to. Athanasios Pagonis, I believe. How will it, I assume he means Starlink, affect the other 80% of the satellite market usage, broadcast, military, government, geo users? So again, this is sort of, you know, what is Starlink going to take into itself as it continues to prosper? Michael, you want to take that one on?
Sure. Just to make sure I quite understand the question, because I think we a bit addressed this earlier, by basically saying they'll take on everyone and anyone. And I want to point out another question along the similar lines, which was talking about, you know, Starlink not having the service level agreements or SLAs of the past that, you know, the geos and others had, where they don't need to provide, it's more this best effort service. And it's a little bit different for what Starlink's trying to provide. I think the bottom line, which is why we've gotten to 4 million customers so far with Starlink, is the fact that the service is so effective, even in a best effort basis. Like even if you have 5 minutes at 1 a.m. that your service drops out every night, if you're getting 150 down instead of 5 to 10 down, like you go with the 150, right? You take the short downtimes. And I think that's what the airlines are choosing, and it's what all these other enterprise verticals are picking up on, where those service level agreements, you know, it almost feels like a little bit of like a legal gimmick of, oh, well, look, we're going to keep you, you know, we're going to keep you connected all the time. It's not going to be very good, but you're going to be connected, right? Like, okay, in the world of social media and digital and software and instant access and connection, that doesn't cut it. It needs to be fast and it needs to be effective. And those downtimes are something that we get used to, you know, from time to time. I had family affected by the CrowdStrike failure that delayed a bunch of flights earlier this year, right? Did it mean that like we didn't get on flights to go down, you know, to family vacation a month later? No, we still got on airplanes, you know, a month later, because they're still needed and useful. That downtime didn't just destroy the airline industry. It was heavily damaging, especially for Delta, for a couple of days, and it was a real pain for everyone who had to go through it. But it didn't mean that like the airline model was broken.
Got it. So a little bit of flow and hustle with the SLAs, if I'm hearing you right. Caleb, I note at the end of your report from yesterday, there's a qualifying note. You say it's worth noting that the FCC filings give a window into the company's future and its vision, but are not a guarantee of near-term actions or actions at all. And you note the FCC's dockets are filled with V-band. You cite V-band constellations that have remained nothing but paper. Therefore, the conclusions outlined above should be taken with a healthy grain of salt. What else about Starlink should we take with a healthy grain of salt? Because we want to stay healthy here on the roundtable.
Healthy and salt's a strange metaphor, I guess, but no. So I think there's the well-known, I forget what it's called, like the Musk distortion field, that the timeline that he puts out may not necessarily be the one that SpaceX hits, but they do get there eventually. I think that's the big difference. Elon may say this will be done in 3 and it might be done in 5, and it's still going to be amazing. But timing is probably the only big one that I would point to in terms of you know, where things need to be reality checked. You know, I guess there was somebody got a hold of their financial projections, and they had forecast something like 20 million subs around now or close to now. They, like everybody else in the industry, sets really high bars and, you know, don't always hit them. But where they do land is still a goalpost moving event. So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think having some realism around what's put out there, I really put that for the FCC just because I think that there's always the risk that people will look at these and say, oh, this is the future. And it's not. Viasat had proposed a Leo constellation at once. I mentioned the Telesat and others. There's lots of sort of an idea mill that's over there, and it gives you room to grow in that direction should you choose to. It's a step to do something. It doesn't mean that you will do something.
Yeah, well qualified. And any of us who have started a business knows that that's exactly true. You do have to set ambitious goals. And I think it was Winston Churchill said that success is built on failure after failure after failure, but keeping your enthusiasm for the idea and staying focused. Vaibhav, Tony Colucci has a question here, which I'm going to throw your way. He said, we've presented a great discussion. Thank you. I agree, including the need for patient capital and lessons learned. To what extent will we benefit going forward by blending in some old space expertise with new space innovation and enthusiasm? Where does the sort of that plane meet or intersect? And more importantly, will there be strategic acquisitions going back and forth between old and new space? And does that demarcation even mean anything anymore?
I think so. I mean, I think the way I kind of read that is it's bringing together multi-orbit capabilities. And so if you were to look at low Earth orbit as, call it quote unquote new space, I look at geostationary or medium Earth orbit as old space. And at the end of the day, there are so many different use cases, which is not maybe fixed mobility, but certainly in the case of IFC and other mobility use cases for broadband, that a multi-orbit capability would actually work quite well. The other area, and this is just taking examples that we've seen that sort of blend together, is if you look back in the past, 5, maybe 7 years, a lot of the ground-based antenna providers, guys that were manufacturing those user terminals and antennas were not necessarily focused on electronically steerable antennas, phaser antennas, things of that nature. The focus still was, here's what we've always provided. It's a fixed antenna, it's parabolic, it's mechanical, it works well for geostationary satellites. Why invest in this future technology? Who knows if LEO is going to be successful or not? Those companies have actually now, in our view, surpassed many of these new startups that were coming about. So in some ways, that is legacy companies that are coming into and offering solutions for the future of new space. So several such examples. I fully think that, like I said before, it's not a one-player take-all market. And so you're going to see reaction from existing players and they'll find ways to survive.
Very good. Michael, looks like somebody pushed back on our SLA's comment. Definitely not a legal gimmick. Oh, I agree with that. I bet you do too.
Oversimplification, if you will, but I think the bottom line is, from a competitive standpoint, people vote with their dollars, right? And they're voting with their dollars by saying, well, we don't really need an SLA if we like the service enough, which is what Starlink is. So that's more to the point of what I'm talking about here. Is it's really just about the fact that Hughes going from 0 to 1 million subscribers in the US in something like 8 years, I think it was seen as pretty, really solid growth. SpaceX did that in like 2.5 years, right? So this is something that they continue to show, that this sort of standard level of service is not something that even, from an IFC standpoint, like with in-flight connectivity, there people are saying like, oh, well, we really, really have to have that still. It's more, oh, actually, we want to tap into this next generation.
Got it. And thanks, Jared. And also thanks for the follow-up. It's a good discussion to have. Just, Christy, there's another question out here. Do we know how many of the 4 million users are actually on autonomous vehicles? I don't know if Jason Rainbow's with us. He's welcome to come in on this. But Caleb, Vaibhav, Michael, does anyone know?
I don't think that figure. I haven't heard much of it being used on autonomous cars yet. I wouldn't be surprised. I do think that is a future application that will probably see widespread adoption of The autonomous cars, one of those features that is, when the industry talks about how important is latency. That's not really something that you can reliably do from geo because the latency is too significant. So you do have to have a low Earth orbit constellation and one that can be responsive. So a future opportunity, but not one we're seeing as something that's being massively implemented at this point in time.
Right. Just 10 seconds, Michael. Do you see any scenario where Starlink or SpaceX could flop?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Like many scenarios. There are so many scenarios that it's like we could spend the next hour.
Yeah, I was just saying.
Like take for example the fact that like it still has a very, very dynamic, I'll use that word very carefully, CEO as its majority shareholder, who, to be honest, could wake up tomorrow and decide, I don't really care about space anymore. Now, I don't think he's going to do that, but like that's one of the scenarios where it flops, right? So then you go from that one all the way down the list.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way,
on that note,
Tamara, I've got another significant digit here. The Tesla Roadster, according to the Where's Roadster site, is 275 million miles from Mars. So listen, before I turn it back over to you, I want to thank the audience. You guys have been great. And Caleb, Henry, and Michael, and Jason, and Joe, and Vaibhav. Tamara, you and Ari and the team are always great, and we love our sponsors. So over to you, Tamara, and thanks again, gentlemen.
thank you all. I put all the information in the chat. You'll expect emails from me, but we are out of time. We're actually 1 minute over, and I never let that happen. So we're out. Thank you all. Take care.
And we'll see you in New York next month. Take care, Joe.